She had been married for 11 years, had given that marriage everything she had, her time, her patience, her loyalty, the quiet and consistent devotion of a woman who believed that love was not something you declared but something you demonstrated, daily, in the 10,000 small ways that no one ever applauds or acknowledges. She had never gone looking for something she did not want to find. She had never opened his phone without permission, never checked his email, never hired anyone to follow him, or asked his friends questions designed to produce answers he had not volunteered. She had trusted Marcus Webb the way she trusted the work she did professionally, completely, based on evidence, and with the specific confidence of someone who has examined the available information and found it sound. But on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with Marcus 3 states away in Phoenix on what he had described as a regional development conference, Dana Webb climbed onto the wooden step stool in the back of their bedroom closet to reach the high shelf where she stored the winter blankets, and her hand closed around a glass mason jar that had absolutely no business being on that shelf. It was sealed with a metal lid, the kind you press down and twist, and through the glass, before she had even opened it, before she had done anything except stand on the step stool in the dim closet light holding it at eye level, she could see things that made her stop breathing for a full 10 seconds. A black USB drive. A folded document creased into quarters. 3 photographs face down, folded once. And underneath all of it, filling the bottom third of the jar with the dense, unmistakable solidity of banded currency, a stack of $100 bills that she would later count and find totaled exactly $47,000. What Marcus David Webb did not know, sitting in his Phoenix hotel room constructing the careful architecture of his double life, was that the woman he had married and trusted to remain quietly within the boundaries he had built around her was a forensic financial investigator, with 15 years of professional experience in finding precisely the kinds of things that people like Marcus believed they had concealed with sufficient care. She had spent her entire career locating the hidden. She had just located the most significant thing she would ever find. And she had not even needed to go looking. Before we go any further into this story, we need you to stop right now and answer something in the comments. If you reached into your own closet and found a sealed jar containing $47,000 in cash, a USB drive, and photographs your spouse had never told you about, what would your very first move be? Would you call them immediately and confront them directly? Or would you go completely silent, put everything back exactly where you found it, and start building a case? Tell us what you would do, and make sure you hit that like button and subscribe before we begin, because this story involves 11 years of marriage, a hidden apartment, a secret child, $1.4 million in concealed assets, and one of the most methodical and precise acts of self-rescue that we have ever had the privilege of putting into words on this channel. Dana Calloway, she had kept her professional name throughout the marriage, a decision Marcus had accepted with the easy generosity of a man who understood that requiring her to change it would have produced resistance, and that avoiding resistance was always preferable to inviting it. Grew up in Columbus, Ohio, the middle child of 3, in a household that was functional in its structure and complicated in its emotional texture in the ways that many households are complicated without anyone in them ever finding the vocabulary to describe it accurately. Her father, Gene Calloway, was an accountant at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in the western suburbs of Columbus, a precise, interior man who expressed his love for his children primarily through the quality of his attention when the subject was numbers, and who was otherwise pleasant and distracted in the way that people are distracted when the world inside their head is more orderly and comprehensible than the world outside it. Her mother, Sandra, was a nurse who worked rotating shifts and was perpetually tired and perpetually warm, a woman who compensated for her physical absence by being, when present, completely and generously there. The kind of mother whose attention, when she gave it, felt like standing in actual sunlight. Dana was 9 years old the first time she sat beside her father at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning and watched him work through a set of financial statements for a client he did some weekend consulting for. She had expected to be bored. She had sat down initially because Jean had a cup of coffee and the kitchen was warm, and the alternative was the living room where her older brother was watching cartoons at a volume that made concentration impossible. But she had looked at what Jean was doing and something had happened in her mind that she would spend years trying to describe accurately and never quite succeed. A recognition, immediate and physical, like a key entering the correct lock, that the language she was looking at was a language she already somehow knew. She asked Jean a question. He looked at her with the startled attention of a man who is not expected to be understood in this particular room. And he answered, and she asked another question, and he answered that, and they sat together at the kitchen table for 3 hours while Jean explained the structure of what he was doing, and Dana absorbed it with an ease that Jean would later tell Sandra was unlike anything he had seen in a student, including students who were adults and being paid to learn. She pursued it with the single-minded intentionality of someone who has found the thing they are for. She studied finance and economics at Ohio State, taking additional coursework in statistics and data analysis that her academic advisor considered beyond the standard requirements, but that Dana found not supplementary but essential. She was building a specific kind of mind, and she knew the materials she needed. She went directly from undergraduate study into a graduate program in forensic accounting, a discipline that had been expanding rapidly since the early 2000s. Corporate scandals had demonstrated, with painful clarity, how much sophisticated financial crime was capable of hiding inside legitimate business structures when no one with the right training was looking for it. She was not merely good at forensic accounting. She was, according to 2 of the 3 professors who wrote her recommendation letters for her first professional position, among the most naturally gifted students they had encountered in the field, someone with the technical foundation and the intuitive pattern recognition that the work required, in a combination that most practitioners developed only through years of experience if they developed it at all. She took a position at Meridian Investigative Finance, a boutique forensic accounting firm in Chicago's Loop, in 2007, and spent the next 5 years building a professional reputation that operated entirely through results and referral. She was not a self-promoter. She did not work the cocktail circuit or position herself at industry conferences, or cultivate the kind of professional visibility that her more ambitious colleagues pursued with the energy of a second career. She did her work with extraordinary precision, and she did it consistently, and the work communicated for her in the way that excellent work communicates. Quietly, through the networks of the people who had been on the receiving end of it and understood its value. She met Marcus Webb at a charity auction for a Children's Hospital Foundation in the Gold Coast in October of 2010. He was 32, 6 feet tall, with dark hair going slightly silver at the temples, and the kind of face that was genuinely pleasant to look at without being so striking as to announce itself. The kind of looks that improve with familiarity rather than diminish, that photograph decently but live better. He worked in commercial real estate development on Chicago's North Side, or described himself as doing so, with the fluent, specificity-adjacent enthusiasm of someone who loves the idea of what they do as much as the practice of it. He spoke about a mixed-use development project in Andersonville with enough technical vocabulary to sound credible and enough genuine animation to sound engaged, and Dana, who was 30 years old and had spent the better part of a decade inside the demanding, detail-saturated world of financial investigation, found his energy genuinely refreshing in the way that direct sunlight is refreshing after a long period of indoor work. They dated for 2 years. She would insist later and consistently that the 2 years were real, not in the self-deceiving way of someone revising painful history into something more comfortable, but in the factually accurate way of someone committed to precision, even when precision is costly. Marcus was present in a way she had not consistently experienced from men she had dated. He remembered the things she told him, referenced them later, demonstrated a continuity of attention that felt, in her experience, genuinely uncommon. He asked her about her work with the specific curiosity of someone who finds her interesting rather than the polite performance of someone waiting for his turn to speak. He showed up when he said he would show up. He was physically warm in a way that was not aggressive or presumptuous, and emotionally accessible in a way that was not performed or strategic, or that did not read as performed or strategic, which she understood was a different statement but which she allowed herself, consciously and deliberately, to treat as equivalent. She made a decision when she met Marcus that she was aware of making. She decided not to run the financial background investigation that her professional tools would have permitted her to run. Not to access the credit histories and business registration records and financial filing patterns that would have produced a comprehensive picture of who Marcus Webb actually was before she invested emotional capital in him. She made this decision because she had thought about it carefully and arrived at a conclusion she believed was correct. That the capacity for genuine intimacy required a different relationship to information than her work did. That you could not love someone the way you loved a case file. That some things needed to be received rather than verified. She was aware that this was a choice. She was aware that choices carry risk. She made it anyway. This was the decision she would revisit, repeatedly and specifically, in the weeks and months that followed the October afternoon in the closet. They married in June of 2012. The ceremony was at a hotel in Lincoln Park. Marcus had organized it, with with the project management energy he brought to things he was invested in. And it was beautiful in the particular way that things are beautiful when someone has paid careful attention to detail and genuinely wanted the result to be good. Dana wore a silk dress the color of heavy cream from a small bridal shop in Wicker Park, and stood at the altar with the specific internal clarity of someone who has made a considered decision and is at peace with it. And Marcus looked at her with an expression she read as love and had, in that moment, every reason to read as nothing else. She continued working after the wedding, because her work was not something she experienced as separate from her identity, but as continuous with it. And Marcus had stated explicitly and apparently sincerely, multiple times and before the marriage as well as after, that her career was not merely something he accepted but something he valued and respected and would never ask her to diminish. She believed him. She took him at his word and kept working the long, demanding hours that her work required and traveled occasionally for cases that required her physical presence in other cities, and brought home the particular tension of difficult professional problems that Marcus had learned over years to navigate around with the considerate patience of someone who understood that her work was serious and required room. They lived in a 2-bedroom condominium in Lincoln Park that Marcus had purchased the year before their marriage, a well-maintained unit in a building with a doorman and a gym and a rooftop deck, on a floor high enough that on clear days the lake was visible from the living room windows in a strip of blue-gray that changed color depending on the weather and the time of day, and that Dana had never entirely stopped finding beautiful regardless of what else was happening. It was a good apartment. It was a good life, measured by the metrics that are available for measuring such things. She noticed things over the years. She noticed them in the way a person trained to notice things notices them. Not with immediate alarm or dramatic response, but with the quiet, precise registration of data that does not yet constitute an actionable pattern. There were phone calls that Marcus took in other rooms, or on the balcony on the days when the weather permitted it, conducted in a voice that was lower and more clipped than his normal register, and that he described, when she mentioned it, as business calls involving sensitive negotiations that required privacy, which was not implausible, because real estate deals at the level Marcus operated did sometimes involve parties who were particular about information management. There were weekend trips described as site visits to development projects that, when she mentioned specific follow-up questions days later, he answered with a vagueness she initially attributed to the preliminary nature of the deals, and the fact that he did not tend to front-load technical detail the way she did. There was money, not a shortage of it, but an opacity about it, a particular quality to Marcus's relationship with his own finances that she had noticed clinically and professionally while simultaneously declining to examine clinically and professionally, because he was her husband and she had made a decision about the relationship between love and investigation, and she was honoring it. Their joint account was funded regularly and without apparent strain. The mortgage was paid. Their life cost what it cost and was covered, and she had no visibility into the details of the covering. She had accepted this year after year, with the specific discipline of someone maintaining a deliberate boundary, not incurious, but self-restricting in the way that the boundary required. She had noticed also, in a way she examined more directly in retrospect than she had in real time, that the version of herself that existed inside the marriage occupied less space than the version that existed at work. Not suppressed, she had too much professional clarity about what suppression looked like to have tolerated it without naming it, but calibrated, adjusted, shaped over years to fit within a set of domestic dynamics that she had never explicitly agreed to but had gradually inhabited. Marcus had preferences about evenings, preferred them at home, preferred them a particular way, expressed this preference with a consistent pleasantness and affection that made it feel like warmth rather than constraint, and that she had not recognized as constraint until she was outside the marriage and standing in rooms that were shaped entirely by her own preferences, and discovered how different that felt. She had not, in 11 years, found anything she could name as evidence. She had felt things. She had noticed things. She had had one direct conversation with Marcus in their 7th year about the phone calls and the opacity and the occasional sense she had of not having a complete picture, and he had responded with such patient, affectionate reasonableness, acknowledging her feelings, validating her concern, explaining the sensitivities involved in the deals he worked on, and then holding her with the specific physical warmth that was the most consistently persuasive thing about him, that she had accepted the explanation and felt, in the hours that followed, something she recognized as guilt for having raised it. This was information she noted and declined to act on at the time, and that she returned to, with considerable analytical attention, after the October afternoon in the closet. The Tuesday she found the jar, she had not been thinking about any of it. She had been thinking about a private equity fraud case she was working on, a complex matter involving a fund in the western suburbs that had been rerouting investor capital through a network of nominally independent LLCs in a pattern that was elegant in its construction and forensically transparent once you knew where to look. And she had been thinking about dinner, and thinking that she needed to call her mother back about Thanksgiving, and then her hand had closed around the glass and everything else had stopped. She stood on the step stool and held the jar at eye level in the dim closet light, and looked at it without moving for what she later estimated as 10 seconds. The cash was immediately visible through the glass. 4 banded stacks of $100 bills pressed against the curved sides of the jar with the dense, unmistakable solidity of serious money held outside a bank. The USB drive was a standard commercial model, black, nothing identifying about it. The photographs were face down and folded, showing only white paper. The document was folded into quarters. The lid was sealed with the firm, deliberate pressure of someone who has pressed it closed and wanted it to stay that way. She stepped off the stool. She carried the jar to the kitchen table. She set it down in the center of the table and sat across from it and looked at it for 3 minutes without touching it, because she understood, with the specific clarity of someone who has spent a career at the precise boundary between information and consequence, that opening this jar was a decision that would change the shape of everything that came after it, and that the 3 minutes before she made it were the last 3 minutes of the version of her life that existed before she knew what was inside. She opened it. She was a professional. She counted the cash first, because you quantify before you analyze. $47,000 in $100 bills in 4 banded stacks. She set the cash to the left of the jar in a clean line. She placed the USB drive to the right. She unfolded the document and smoothed it flat against the table with the palm of her hand, and read it completely, from the header to the signature line, twice. Then she unfolded the photographs and laid them in a row in front of her, face up, in the order she had removed them from the jar. The document was a lease agreement. 2-bedroom apartment in Wicker Park. Tenant, Marcus David Webb. Monthly rent, $2,400. Term, 24 months. Execution date, 14 months prior. Marcus's signature at the bottom in the handwriting she had seen on 11 years of birthday cards and anniversary notes, and the marriage certificate itself, still in the file drawer in the second bedroom that she used as a home office. The first photograph showed Marcus with a woman she had never seen. Not in a position that would constitute legal evidence of anything in particular, simply standing together in what appeared to be a kitchen, both holding coffee mugs, with the specific unposed ease of 2 people who exist in comfortable proximity to each other in the same domestic space. The woman was perhaps 35 years old, dark-haired, with a face that read as warm even in a still image. The second photograph showed the same woman in an armchair, holding an infant against her chest, her face carrying the specific exhausted radiance of the very recently postpartum. A look that Dana had seen on friends and colleagues and recognized immediately, and without ambiguity. The infant was very small, a newborn or close to it. The third photograph showed Marcus holding the same child, standing near a window, looking down at the baby with an expression that Dana had seen on parents, specifically on fathers, specifically in the early weeks of fatherhood when the reality of the person they have helped create is still arriving in waves of surprised recognition. It was not an ambiguous expression. It was the face of a man looking at his child. She placed all 3 photographs in a line. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at them for a while. She was not crying. She was aware that she was not crying, and she was aware that what she was feeling was not the collapsing, immediate grief of heartbreak, but something colder and more structural. A state she recognized from the moments in her professional life when a financial investigation produces findings that are significant and clear and require an immediate decision about what to do next. She was in that state now. She was operating in it with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been in it many times before, and she was grateful, in a specific and almost clinical way, for the training that made it available to her. She picked up the USB drive. She went to her desk in the second bedroom, and opened her personal laptop and plugged the drive in. There were 37 files. She opened them in alphabetical order, which was not the most logically optimal sequence, but was the sequence she defaulted to when she did not yet know the shape of what she was looking at and needed the discipline of structure to prevent premature conclusion. It took 2 hours and 43 minutes to work through all 37 files. When she finished, she sat back from the laptop and looked at the window and the darkening October sky for approximately 2 minutes. And then she began making notes. The apartment in Wicker Park was occupied by a woman named Rachel Torres, age 34, a kindergarten teacher employed by a school in the West Loop. The 14-month-old infant in the photographs was a girl named Emma Rachel Webb. Emma's birth certificate was one of the 37 files. Marcus David Webb was listed as the father. There was also documentation in the files related to a second apartment, this one in Roscoe Village, also leased in Marcus's name, from a period beginning approximately 4 years prior to the Wicker Park lease. The Roscoe Village documentation was older. The most recent file associated with it dated more than 2 years ago, suggesting that relationship had concluded or changed form before Rachel Torres had entered the picture. The financial architecture was more complex and took longer to trace, but Dana had the professional tools and the specific, heightened attention of someone who has discovered that the financial opacity she had extended professional courtesy to for 11 years was not a personality quirk or a business preference but a structural necessity. The deliberate, maintained concealment required to fund and sustain a parallel domestic life in the same city where she lived with him. There were 3 LLCs registered in Illinois under names that contained no reference to Marcus Webb, traceable to him through registered agent records that were publicly available, and that she pulled that same evening through a database her firm subscribed to. Through these 3 entities, money from Marcus's real estate commissions, which were real, the commissions were real. She noted this because she was noting everything accurately, had been routed before landing in personal accounts she had not previously known existed. The cash in the jar was a liquid reserve, held outside the banking system, available for operational expenses that he could not run through any account connected to the life they shared without creating a visible record. She completed her preliminary analysis at 11:47 that evening. She put the USB drive in her personal work bag. She put the photographs in her work bag. She put the document in her work bag. She replaced the cash in the jar, pressed the lid closed to the same firmness she had found it at, and returned the jar to the high shelf in the closet, positioning it within the dust outline that indicated where it had been sitting. She was meticulous about the positioning. She needed Marcus to have no indication that anything had changed when he returned on Thursday. She went back to the kitchen and made coffee and called Patricia Walsh. Patricia was a forensic accountant at a competing firm whom Dana had known for 12 years through a series of cases where they had been on opposing sides of investigations. The kind of professional relationship that adversarial competence sometimes builds into genuine respect, because there is no better way to assess what someone is actually capable of than watching them work against you. She told Patricia she had a personal matter that required an independent forensic financial investigation, and that she needed complete confidentiality and the highest quality work available. Patricia, who did not deal in unnecessary language, asked when Dana needed her to start. Dana said tomorrow morning. Patricia said she would clear her calendar. She called James Okafor the following morning, a family law attorney with a specific reputation in Cook County high-asset divorce cases that Dana had encountered professionally and noted, in the way she noted things, as someone who knew exactly what he was doing. She made an appointment for that afternoon. She brought her preliminary notes and the USB drive files she had compiled into a clean summary document on her encrypted laptop, and she sat across from James Okafor in his Michigan Avenue office and walked him through what she had found with the same structured precision she used when presenting forensic findings to clients or legal teams. James Okafor reviewed the summary with the careful, unhurried attention of an experienced attorney who has seen many versions of this situation and understands that the quality of the documentation is the quality of the case. When she finished, he asked her 3 clarifying questions, received 3 precise answers, and then leaned back in his chair and told her that she had the foundation for one of the stronger dissipation of marital assets cases he had seen in his practice, and that the documented financial transfers, the rent payments, the monthly support transfers to Rachel Torres's account, the credit card expenses, constituted marital asset dissipation that was directly and substantially recoverable under Illinois equitable distribution law, and that given the documented concealment, the duration of the conduct, and the existence of a child, a court would be very unlikely to view the equitable distribution calculus as anything approaching equal. He told her not to confront Marcus, not to alter anything in their joint financial accounts, not to remove any assets or change any passwords, and not to give any indication that she was aware of any of this until the filing was complete and served. He told her the filing would be ready in 10 to 12 days. She thanked him. She paid his retainer from her personal account, a separate account she had maintained throughout the marriage for her own professional expenses, a habit of financial independence that she had never examined as precautionary, but that was, in this moment, extremely useful. She drove home. She cooked dinner. She ate it at the kitchen table and looked at the lake in the October darkness and thought about 11 years with the precision and the honesty she tried to bring to everything. Not revising, not softening, actually looking. There were real things in the 11 years. She was committed to acknowledging that even now, the marriage had been, in much of its actual texture, what she had believed it to be. That was not incompatible with what she had found. Both things were simultaneously true, and she held both of them without resolving the tension. Because the tension was accurate, and resolving it would have required her to sacrifice accuracy for comfort, which she was not willing to do. What she was also not willing to do was pretend she hadn't seen what she had seen. Patricia Walsh delivered her independent forensic financial report 9 days later. It was comprehensive and technical and confirmed everything Dana had found in her preliminary analysis, while adding significant additional detail about the structure and timing of the financial flows. The total amount that had moved through Marcus's 3 LLCs and undisclosed personal accounts over the documented period, 7 years, based on the oldest file timestamps, was $1.4 million. Of this, approximately $680,000 was accounted for in documented disbursements. Lease payments, monthly transfers to Rachel Torres's personal account, the supplemental credit card covering household expenses at the Wicker Park address, and various other expenses directly associated with the parallel household. The remaining $720,000 had accumulated in an investment account opened under one of the LLCs, performing steadily for 4 years, entirely outside the marital estate as Marcus had structured it. James Okafor filed the divorce petition with the Cook County Circuit Court on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after their initial meeting. Dana was at her desk in the Loop working on the private equity case when her phone showed a notification from his office confirming the filing had been accepted. She sat for a moment looking at the notification. She felt the specific sensation of a significant and irreversible thing having been set in motion. Not relief, not grief, but the particular feeling of weight redistributing itself along the lines of what was actually true rather than what had been maintained as a performance of truth for 11 years. Marcus received service that evening. The process server handed the envelope to their building's doorman at 6:42, and the doorman called up to the unit at 6:44, and Dana was in the kitchen making tea when she heard Marcus answer the intercom, and then go down to the lobby and come back up. And she heard the particular quality of silence that a room takes on when someone in it has just received information that reorganizes the fundamental architecture of their understanding of their own life. She stayed in the kitchen. She finished making the tea. She heard him open the envelope. She heard the silence that followed, which lasted longer than the first silence, and was a different kind. He came to the kitchen doorway. He was holding the papers. His face had a quality she had not seen on it in 11 years of watching it. Not anger, not the defensive warmth he deployed when challenged, not the affectionate reasonableness that had closed every difficult conversation they had ever had. Something structural had failed. She could see it the way you see it in a building when the load-bearing element has been compromised and the surface is still intact, but the thing that was holding it up is no longer there. He said her name. She turned from the counter. She looked at him. She did not perform anything. She did not stage the confrontation that the situation could have supported, or give him the dramatic reaction that would have allowed him to manage his own response against the backdrop of hers. She simply looked at him with the clear, undeflected steadiness of someone who has done all the necessary work and knows exactly what the work produced, and does not require anything further from this moment. He asked her how she had found out. It was the first full sentence he managed, and it told her something about where his mind had gone first, to the mechanism of discovery rather than to the fact of it, which was information she noted and filed. She told him about the jar. She told him she had gone to get the winter blankets on Tuesday afternoon and found it, and that it had taken her 2 hours and 43 minutes to go through all 37 files on the USB drive, and that she had retained an independent forensic accountant who had spent 9 days building a comprehensive financial analysis of the 7 years of transactions through his 3 LLCs and 4 undisclosed accounts. She told him this with the same tone she used to present findings to legal teams. Clearly, specifically, without editorial comment. He said he could explain. He started a sentence about Rachel and about the situation being complicated, and about how things had developed over years in ways he had not intended, and that he had been trying to find a way to. And Dana listened to 40 seconds of it, and then she told him, without raising her voice, that she was not going to have the explanation conversation. She told him that she had the information she needed, that her attorney had the information her attorney needed, and that his questions and communications going forward should be directed to James Okafor, whose contact information was in the filing documents he was holding. He said her name again. He said something about the marriage having been real, about still loving her, about not wanting this outcome. She looked at him and considered these statements with the same honesty she was trying to apply to everything, and she concluded that some of them were probably true in the limited, contradicted way that things can be true when the person saying them has simultaneously been doing what he had been doing. She told him she believed he believed them, and that it did not change the actual situation, which was documented and filed and in motion. She told him she was going to stay with her friend Carla for 2 weeks while he made arrangements to vacate, and that her attorney had filed a motion for exclusive occupancy of the condominium given the circumstances, and expected it to be granted within the week, and that she expected him to be fully moved out before she returned. She had packed a bag that morning, properly, thoroughly, the way she did things, and it was in the front closet. She picked it up. She picked up her work bag. She said goodbye to Marcus Webb in the kitchen of the Lincoln Park condominium, and she said it without cruelty and without performance and without any of the theatrical release that the situation might have accommodated, because she was tired and because none of that was what she needed. She went to Carla's apartment in Lakeview, and Carla opened the door and did not say anything except that she had made soup, and Dana sat down at Carla's kitchen table and allowed, for the first time since the October afternoon in the closet, the actual grief of the thing to arrive. Not the collapsing kind. Not the kind that requires management or that embarrasses the person feeling it. The kind that is simply the body's honest acknowledgement that something real has been lost, that 11 years is 11 years, that love was love even when it was also incomplete and also built on something withheld, and that loss does not require betrayal to be absent in order to be real. She cried at Carla's kitchen table for about 20 minutes, and then she ate the soup because it was good soup and she had not eaten properly since Tuesday. She went to work every day for the 2 weeks she stayed at Carla's. She worked on the private equity case, which had grown in complexity with the addition of 3 new defendants and a parallel federal investigation that her firm had been asked to support. She worked with the same precision she always worked with, because the work did not adjust itself to accommodate what was happening in her personal life, and she found that reliable and steadying. The work was what it was regardless of everything else, and that consistency was something she needed during a period when most other things were not consistent. James Okafor and Marcus's attorney reached a settlement framework within 4 months of the filing date, because Marcus's attorney was experienced enough to understand what the documented evidence established, and had communicated this understanding to his client in terms clear enough to produce a disposition toward resolution rather than contest. The settlement that was finalized 7 months after Dana sat at the kitchen table with the mason jar gave her the Lincoln Park condominium outright, a cash settlement of $890,000 representing her share of the documented marital assets plus the assessed dissipation amount, and a structured payment of $240,000 over 3 years against the investment account. Marcus retained his LLC structures, his real estate business, and his relationship with Rachel Torres and their daughter Emma, which was his to manage going forward and which Dana declined to complicate beyond what the legal process required. She had no interest in Rachel Torres's life. She had no interest in the child as a point of leverage. The child was 14 months old and had not made any choices, and Dana was not a person who redirected anger at people who had not earned it. She moved back into the condominium in the spring. She had it repainted entirely, every room, in colors she had carried in her head for years without acting on them because the existing colors had been Marcus's before she moved in, and she had never made it the thing she spent energy on. The bedroom became a particular shade of warm gray blue. The living room became the deep, muted green of old library walls. The kitchen she left mostly as it was because she had always genuinely liked the kitchen, and there was no logic in erasing things simply because they were associated with a chapter she was closing. She put new furniture in the bedroom. She bought a desk she had been wanting for 3 years, a large, solid one in pale ash wood with enough surface area to spread documents across the way she worked, and a monitor arm she had also been wanting, and had also not bought for reasons she could no longer entirely reconstruct. She put it in the corner of the second bedroom that had always been her home office, and she worked at it on evenings and weekend mornings with the specific satisfaction of someone using exactly the tool they need in exactly the right space. The private equity case went to federal prosecution the following year. Dana's firm's forensic analysis was cited extensively in the government's filing, And the partner who presented the work to the prosecutorial team told Dana afterward that the government's lead attorney had described it as the clearest and most complete forensic financial presentation he had seen in 20 years of financial crime prosecution. Dana noted this and went back to the case she was currently working on, which was a securities fraud matter involving a technology company in the River North neighborhood, and which was interesting in ways that the private equity case had also been interesting, and that she was glad to be engaged with. She was, by any honest assessment, well. She was not performing wellness or managing herself into the performance of a resilience narrative. She was simply a person who had been through something real and had handled it with the full capacity available to her, and had arrived on the other side in a life that was, and she examined this claim carefully before allowing herself to make it, genuinely better than the life she had been living. Not better in the way of having escaped suffering. Better in the way of being more accurately herself. The apartment was hers in a way it had not been when she shared it. The evenings were structured around her actual preferences. The space she occupied in her own life was the space she took up, undistorted by the adjustments she had been making without fully acknowledging she was making them. She had lunch with her father Gene one Sunday in November, at a restaurant near his Columbus hotel on a trip he had taken for a financial conference. They sat across from each other with coffee and eggs, and Gene asked her, in the careful way of a man trying to ask the right question, whether she was okay. She told him she was. She told him she was better than okay, actually. She told him she had found a jar in a closet, and it had turned out to contain the exact information. She needed to understand something she had been not quite looking at for a long time. Gene, who had built his professional life on the premise that accurate information, however inconvenient, was always preferable to incomplete information, however comfortable, nodded at this with the specific approval of a man hearing something that confirms a principle he has held for decades. He said that was a good thing, finding it when she did. She said yes. She thought about the October afternoon, the step stool, the dim closet light, her hand closing around the cold glass, and she thought yes it was. It was exactly the right time to find it. Not because the timing had been chosen or designed, but because she had been ready to see it clearly and act on it precisely, which was all the preparation the moment had ever actually needed. She had always been good at finding the thing that someone believed they had hidden well enough. She had simply, this once, found it in her own home. And she had known, from the moment her hand closed around that sealed jar in the October light, before she had even stepped down from the stool, before she had carried it to the kitchen table, and opened it and counted the cash and read the lease and looked at the photographs. She had known, with the deep professional certainty of 15 years of looking at hidden things, exactly what she was holding and exactly what she was going to do with it. She always did.